secret. Never play a best than secret. Never play a rhyme, play a rhyme best. Never play a rhyme best less than secret.
All right, y'all. It's another week and another dose of the Void. Supposed to have a special guest today, King Siik. However, I haven't heard from King Siik since setting up this episode that he was going to here on. Be honest with you, I don't really know King, as he goes by, as King Siik. But hopefully he'll join me here in but a moment. But until then, we're just chilling. Let me get the camera on so you can see. Oh my God, there's dogs outside. I can hear them, and the dogs inside are going crazy. So if you hear the dogs, I don't think anyone's robbing the house. It's probably dogs outside because I can hear them outside. All right. So, hopefully, King Siik will be joining. If not, we'll just have a show without a guest. We've had plenty of those. If you or anyone else would like to be on the show and talk about any issues that you have, or that you'd like to, issues that you have, or things that you want to talk about that have been on your mind, and you want to be on the show to talk about them and field viewer questions, please get in touch. Would love to have you on. What's up, superfan Chris? And by the way, first patron on Patreon. So I do have a Patreon, and thank you very much for being the first. I got to figure out, like, what do you want special? All the patrons always seem to get something special for supporting. I have mixed feelings about that. Like, I want everyone to be able to access all content, but I also want to encourage people to support the show, because I'd like to make more shows. And who knows, it'd be really cool to have some more resources for doing this and getting the word out. And just, I don't know. I think it'd be cool to go to some of these political conventions. So it'd be cool to get enough patrons or supporters or whatever to send the Boyd podcast out there to ask the hard-hitting questions and to try to sit and have a conversation with somebody without it getting crazy. Now, for those of you that know me on Facebook, I think I heard a human voice. Nah, I don't know. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, so I'm guessing no one's breaking into my house. But if they are, I've been trying to sell off a bunch of stuff anyway, so maybe they'll have a easier time of it than I've been. All right. Jay Noche, what's up, man? thank you for joining. I'm glad that you are making your presence known. Send them a book you like. Oh, well, it depends on how much they're supporting me, because I might not be able to send out too many books. However, I have been thinking about setting up like a sort of like a reading group or something, like for tackling sort of, not that I'm like some special expert, but we can sort things out on some big books or sort of tricky literature, like stuff like Capital or The Wealth of Nations, or maybe what's that, the Monster from Jekyll Island, or whatever that name of that book was. Things like that. I haven't actually read that book. It would make it sort of force me to read that book. Or, I've seen there's a, who is this? I think it's called, there's a group out there. I think they are either Discourse Collective, which is is a pretty good podcast. Discourse Collective, or it is dang it, I can't remember what their name is. It'll come to me later. Anyway, I think it is Discourse Collective that does this. They basically they have their patrons, if they're a certain level patron, can sort of dictate what books they read, and then they have to give a synopsis on that. The Creature from Jekyll Island, that's what it is. Thank you, Chris. What was I going to say? I don't remember exactly, but anyway, they had to read these books. So the cool thing about it, and by the way, on Facebook, all the folks that are joining, thank you for joining, and please be sure to write a comment. Unfortunately, Facebook, for whatever reason, it's sort of slow to update on my computer. Maybe it's just me, but anyway. Put in a live comment and join the conversation. So, speaking of conversation, here we go. Let's see. Jay says, thanks. My girlfriend is an educator at the Jekyll Island Museum. Ooh. Well, I think it's less about Jekyll Island per se and more about what happened there. But I mean, it's still about Jekyll Island. I mean, Jay, how much do they talk about that fateful meeting that led to the creation of the Fed by a bunch of oligarchs, basically, that were in charge of our country? But yeah, do they talk much about? I would imagine if it's a government thing, maybe they do. I mean, there's sort of woke government entities out there, so maybe they're trying to spread the word. Secret meeting about the bankers on the island is what the book is based on. Oh, Jay said he's seen the Fed Room. Is that where they created it? I wonder if they talk about that as a girlfriend's job. It's a source of historical reference. Yes, indeed. So, and that sort of leads us to sort of not a crazy thing, but sort of a frustrating thing to me about reality versus history versus, I guess it all just culminates in our current material reality that we all share together on this earth, more or less. And the fact that, if, let's say, for instance, if the Jekyll Island Museum is officially talking about the creation of the Fed and who actually attended and all of these things, and we don't consider that in our current discourse about the Fed, and we start this sort of conjecture about what do you call it? Oh my God, conspiracy theories. God, blank out the word conspiracy. Conspiracy theories, because sometimes if we talk about the Fed and how it was created and this and that, if we look at it in the contemporary sense and try to sort of discredit or condemn the Fed, where a lot of people are met with this a lot of resistance, that's um, a lot of resistance and a lot of sort of deflection to the potential of it being a conspiracy theory, even though, it's something that happened. I mean, according to sources, maybe they're lying. I don't know, but I mean, I don't know. There's supposedly some other documentation about it as well. So anyway, but that just leads. I think that leads us to the frustration of trying to figure out what the hell is going on in the world and who's right about anything. You can't believe what you hear and see on the media, though. Like only a couple companies own all the media, and so you can't help but be around it. It's always around, and someone owns. It's almost like there's a major corporation or something behind everything, and not trying to make it sound like corporations are simply evil on their face or something like that. But corporations have corporate bylaws and statutes that basically force CEOs and anyone with fiduciary control or interest in the corporation to seek profit, basically as the prime directive. So it sort of basically creates this psychopathic entity by default. It actually would have to break away from its single-minded scope or aim. I mean, and in what Adam Smith talks about with the invisible hand, he speaks in a much more in-depth and much more not in-depth from his point of view, in-depth from the corporation or corporate owner's point of view. That, for instance, the invisible hand would not just be the market guiding the machinations of prices and supply and demand. It's not that. It's that people who are in control, like corporate owners, for instance, that they, in their own self-interest, long-term self-interest, for instance, wouldn't outsource jobs or outsource materials that would end up hurting the home state or the home economy. And that is inclusive in the invisible hand discussion from Adam Smith, though it's been perverted by basically the capitalists and their followers to perverted to just simply mean market forces. And it's not just market forces. The invisible hand is long-term self-interest will beget good for all, right? Long-term, not quarterly, not short-term, right? So when we're looking at or even looking at just raw profits and not looking at consumer base, for instance, or knowing that your consumer base is because of dropping wages and less and fewer jobs, for instance, or fewer high-paying jobs, that your demographics are shifting, your customer base is shifting, and instead of helping to aid for the sake of the nation, because now your self-interest is drowned by the short-term self-interests of all the other companies, because again, a CEO or someone in a fiduciary capacity for a corporation has to, by statute, has to run the corporation to seek profit and also to maintain share price. And so the fact you're competing with a bunch of other companies that are basically in it for short-term profit in order to boost not only their own short-term profits, but also to boost shareholder profits or shareholder gains in price, etc. The focus becomes different, because you, as a CEO, you can rack up the bill basically and bounce off to another company. and the people involved at your level, at your echelon within the company, would end up getting a whole bunch of money. So they would welcome you into another company. So this type of person at a different company might very well welcome you to a new company where they can, extract, make some changes, extract major profits. It could be at the detriment of employees, the detriment of cities and communities. It doesn't matter, because the profits are the central drive, not the long-term, longevity and health of the company, like Adam Smith's invisible hand example gives. Jay is talking about like a pump and dump. Yeah, pump and dumps are like that too. Pump and dump is, I mean, it's illegal to do those things, but people do them. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to, that's manipulating the market. But that happens all the time. If you watch Boiler Room, or you watch, I mean, there's people making illegal either claims or like, well, so like pump and dump. To explain pump and dump, basically you're looking at a situation where like you and maybe a group of your buddies go and in a coordinated fashion buy a whole bunch of shares of something, to the point where you start seeing a shift in the market price. And then you start seeing, as other people start seeing the market price move up, they want to jump on to the momentum. And so by other people buying, it now lowers the supply. When the supply drops, the price goes up. Really what's happening is limit orders are being filled. So as you fill all the limit orders that are low, you start eliminating those and then rising up to the higher limit orders. Or the other way to think about it is supply and demand. Either way works. And they're both happening. And so what often will happen is you see people, even though it's counterintuitive to what real investors should really do. Like, for instance, you always want to buy something at a discount, right? When you go shopping, you don't go and say, oh, wow, Jordans are going up in price, I better go buy them at, well, I guess you could. I mean, if they were going up in price on the black market. But if you were, let's say, I mean, just at the retail store, let's say they're continuing to go up in price. You might want to jump in, I guess, if you thought that it was going to be a crest further out from the point that you bought. But I guess the general point, due to efficient markets theory, right? Efficient markets theory tells us that no one gets a good deal. Right. I mean, a couple people get a good deal, but really no one gets a good deal. What does that mean? That the market is efficient. That means that whatever is known, whatever can known is known and acted upon. So basically, unless you have insider information, everything you know is probably something that everyone else knows, because how did you know it? Right. So efficient markets theory is basically that the market will adjust itself efficiently, because everyone's trying to get that edge. And so basically, wait, why was I talking about efficient markets theory? Shit, I can't remember. Oh yeah, well, it basically so pumping up, as price goes up, people start. Oh yeah, it was about being counterintuitive or something. It's counterintuitive. So by the time you realize that the Jordans are going up in price, it's already probably getting close to its zenith. Because why? Because other people start seeing that as a sell opportunity, and they start selling their Jordans, right? So at some point, the market will reach equilibrium. But some people would look at the market and say, I'm not going to buy these sneakers as they're going up in price. I would wait for them to go on sale, and then I would buy them. Now sneakers, I mean, that's different. I mean, because I guess if you want to be in fashion, you have it first or some crap. So yeah, I don't know. It's different. It's a little different because stocks are fungible. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's not like you're trying to. It's not like certain stocks are better than others. I mean, as far as if you're buying GM stock, one share of stock is the same. You wouldn't know any different than another share of stock. So they're fungible. Like dollar bills are fungible. Um, some stuff like grain and oil and stuff are also fungible. So that seems like a word. So we should look up that word. So fungible basically means interchangeable. That you like, for instance, people's cars are not fungible because first of all, you could have a lemon versus someone else who doesn't have a lemon, or maybe your hygienic habits are different than other people's hygienic habits. So therefore, your car is different than other people's cars. Um, you see what I mean? So it's not the same. So all Toyota Camrys, even if they're the same make, I mean, the same year and trim and everything, they're not fungible because once you've owned it, it now takes on different characteristics that are intrinsic to it now. Now, not necessarily intrinsic to the object itself, but intrinsic to the notion that you have used it. Whereas a dollar bill, you could use the dollar and a million people can use that dollar bill and you'll still use it because it is a fungible item. Commodities are fungible. So here we go. Adjective of goods contracted for. Wait, hold on. Let me change it. Of goods contracted for without an individual specimen being specified, able to replace or be replaced by another identical item, mutually interchangeable. Right. So to some degree, crude oil, for instance, is crude oil is fungible. Now there is some breakdown in different types of oil, etc. But in general, crude oil is fungible. But commodities in general are fungible. Steel is fungible. Jay is saying, King Sick just joined it into our YouTube. Okay, hold on. Let me see. All right, let me see. Let's get him. Let's see if we can get him on the line. I'm not 100% sure what we were going to talk about, but let's see what he has to say, because I always think it's interesting to have a guest and get their sort of point of view on things. Anyway, pump and dump, yeah, that's market manipulation, but they're not allowed to. Corporations aren't allowed to do that. Let's see here. They're not, but there's a lot of different rules about certain people, like executives and stuff like that, and what they can do or not do with their stocks because of insider information. But I wonder how much of that type of regulation is going to get repealed. Number one. Number two, guess who doesn't have that kind of regulation? Politicians. Guess who writes the laws that affect the markets? Politicians. So how come they get to play that game? All right, let's see. Let's see if we can get them patched in. Let's see what's up. But like I said, if you want to be on the show, if you have a topic or something, whatever you want to talk about, you want to be on the show, especially if you want to field questions and help people understand something, get on the show and let's talk about stuff. Jay says, yes, like coins are standardized. However, like a numismatist may, looking at historic coins or other, coins in like from a collector, like especially old stuff, the condition of the item can change. So it depends on the coin, whether it's fungible, if it's a collectible, right? I guess. And same for same for current paper money too. Some people collect the paper money just for the collection value, not the actual monetary value. So, okay, let's see. Okay, King Six said Federal Reserve banking requirements is one. Oh yeah, I think I remember you mentioning that. Election 2020. Okay, sounds good. So, are you going to? Do you want to Skype in? If you want, just hit me up on Skype. I'll patch you through, and then we can get the discussion going. Fed requirements. What was Federal Reserve banking requirements? What was whoops, let me put it. Okay, let's see. Hopefully the levels are all right here. Being sick. Hello?
What's going on? Being
sick. Hello?
What's going on?
Oh, sick. Hello?
What's going on?
Sick. Hello? Hello?
Maybe I need to turn that down. How's that?
Yes, that's much better. There you go. I was like trying to turn down all sorts of stuff to see.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I think, hey, the folks out there in the audience, let me know if we're having any audio issues, if anyone's coming in too loud or whatever, because I don't have anyone monitoring that specifically to tell me. So let me know in the comments, please. It's only for your benefit. All right, welcome, King Sick. What is up, man? This is let's go crazy. The Boyd audience out there. This is the first time we've talked to each other. So what's up?
What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Welcome to the Boyd. I'm we're Facebook acquaintances. I think we linked up based on probably dialogue we saw each other engage in. Etc. But we resonate on quite a few topics, etc. And I know that you are very opinionated and you have a lot in your mind. So I thought, man, you'd be a great guest to have on the show. And it sounds like you're getting sort of some fans that are egging you to start your own show.
Right. Yeah, when you do as much reading as I've done, and you have as much to share as I do, then obviously it becomes a thing where you want to share that information, right? So that's really where I'm at with it, is just trying to share the information that I've got with other people. So I feel like getting to YouTube is really the next step, so to speak.
Okay. Well, now I want to remind me, please. I want to have you sort of tell the audience a little bit about yourself and whatnot. But one thing you mentioned, the amount of reading that you do. Tell me a little bit about. I think a lot of the folks listening and watching, etc., would be interested in reading more. What are some of your sort of strategies to doing that?
For me, you have to be able to what you're reading. You know what I mean? You got to find places to read. I live by the ocean. I live in Florida, so
Okay.
it kind of makes it a lot easier to want to get into that, right? Just because, um, you know, I'm by the water, and you can go to the beach at any time, sit down, read a book, and it's really kind of peaceful. Nobody really messes with you. You get a little chair in the sand, and people are gonna pretty much leave you alone. You know, so that's really what I appreciate about it, and that's what kind of why I moved here, because I'm originally from a place called Oklahoma. You
Yeah.
may have heard of it.
In fact, I have. I lived in Del City for a while.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that explains a lot because I went to Midwest City High School. My family was military. We ended up settling at Tinker Air Force
Tinker.
Base,
Yeah.
at the
Same
end.
here. I'm
So
a military
yeah,
kid as well.
huh?
I'm a military kid as well. My pops was stationed at Tinker.
Right.
So,
See, I
yep.
mean, ironically, like this, like you said, this is the first time we talked, so that kind of explains a lot. Probably how we, our circles kind of, intersected, um, and definitely, maybe the military family background, maybe why maybe some of the politics may intersect. Well, although a lot of my politics don't necessarily follow what military people or children normally generally think, because everything is just kind of free thought and it's information based. And there's really no, like a lot of times people are like, there really seems to be no method to your madness. You're all over the place. One day I could be dissing a Democrat, and the other day I could be dissing a Republican, and people are completely thrown. And they're like, "What's your affiliation to?" And I tell them, "It's to justice. Motherfucker. It's the only thing that you should be concerned about
That's funny
is
you say
justice."
that. I think that there's been some people perplexed on this show and almost disturbed that they can't sort of figure my political stance per se. I mean, in the contemporary sense, I guess. But
Right.
it all depends on if whether or not it's good for the American people, and like you said, if it's serving the justice for all. And yeah, so if a Democrat, it doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican. I don't care about the parties.
Right.
Yeah, what does that have to do with me? They serve me. They're supposed to serve me. If neither of them serve me, then they're worth shit to me.
Right. Right.
You know,
And
but
they
they
can be
but
outside
but people are
starving.
so
Right.
yeah, people are so caught up in it. What do you do? Do you have any methods to sort of break through that sort of I don't know, mind trap?
Politically, for me, being I'm like like I love the cornerstone, the foundational stone to anything. Right. I'm from the country. I was involved in, some construction and stuff like that. And so one thing I always understood when it comes to building is always, check for the cornerstone, literally.
Mm-hmm.
Then I sold cars, and cars are based on a few important parts to the vehicle, or what you would call, say, the cornerstone of the vehicle, right? Um, and so the same thing was with researching politics, economics, history, business, whatever. I always try to go find the cornerstone. And when you go find the cornerstone of politics, you start to obviously come away with the Greek or the Hellenistic influence of politics. And when you do, then you can actually look at the people of Greece, you can look at that period of time, and you can kind of start to qualify a lot of the intent, because a lot of the intentions of the government that was created under the Greek people, just, in the very way they created it, was not designed to be some fair system. It was a con from the very beginning. And so to look at the game now, how it has progressed, and they've dressed it up. White supremacy has created a vast amount of wealth and resources with which to, instrument this and indoctrinate people into this concept, this binary concept of politics that they give you, right? And so when you ask me what's the strategy, I go to the cornerstone, which is to have a foundational understanding of what was the original implementation of politics on a population of people. And if people are not lazy and they go do their own research, because I could sit here and tell you, what I got out of that, and maybe you get something different. Maybe you think that these were genuine people and they really had the will of the people in mind. I don't know what you would be reading, but I would really love for people to draw their own conclusions, not just listen to me. But
speaking
you
of,
know,
like,
it's as simple as that.
what's what are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm reading from Babylon to Timbuktu. It's actually a book I've read before. Let me see here. This book right here. I don't know. Can you see that?
Yes.
And so, from Babylon to Timbuktu, it's written by Rudolph Windsor, and you know, it's a beautiful. I'll just read the back page of it. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Please do.
And it says, until comparatively recent times, knowledge that Black Africa was the seat of highly evolved civilizations and cultures during a time when Europe stagnated was limited to a small group of scholars. The great empires such as Ghana and later Mali flourished for centuries while Europe slept through its dark ages almost has been ignored by historians. Thousands of years before that, as Rudolph R. Windsor notes in this enlightening book, civilization began with the black races of Africa and Asia, including the Hebrews, who in biblical times were jet black. Then Western Europe had no nations as such, and its Stone Age inhabitants had but the crudest tools and lived in caves. Because of the scarce literature on the contribution of blacks to world civilization, most people today hold erroneous opinion that the black races have little real history. It was not known, for instance, that the ancient Hebrews, Mesopotamians, Phoenicians, and Egyptians were black. Now, a growing body of literature is presenting the illustrious history of the blacks and their enormous contributions. This carefully researched book is a significant addition to this vital field of knowledge. It sets forth fascinating detail the history from earliest recorded times of the black races of the Middle East and Africa. Mr. Windsor's discussion of Islamic civilization and the movement of the black Hebrews to all parts of Africa is edifying and absorbing. Readers, regardless of race, will find this factual story of a noble heritage a valuable enrichment to their knowledge of world history.
Wow.
From Babylon to Timbuktu. And so, yeah, that's on another topic, you know, for a different day. But that's definitely one of those foundational pieces of literature for me. You know, I was incarcerated, I was in prison, you know, and I read a lot of books that gave me a foundation to move forward from just really a life of crime. And you know, when you talk about the black criminal, for most people that I knew growing up, we were the kids who played ball. We were the good athletes. We were this. We were popular. We were cool. But when it came time to grow up, be adults and enter the workforce or go to school and get it, that's when economics starts to play a factor. And I saw a lot of people choose routes in order to get those economics to secure that house or to, as the youngsters say now, secure the bag. In order to do that, a lot of people made decisions, what we call penitentiary chances, and I was one of those people. Although for me, really, I didn't really have to. I had a family that did well, but where their money is their money, right? That comes with rules and standards, and these are military folks. And so sometimes you're young, you're 19, 18, 17, 16 years old, you want to live outside of some rules for a little while.
No doubt. Dude, if I only knew, I mean, I'm just lucky I didn't get caught doing some of the things I did. Hold on one second. There's someone tapping on my shop door.
All right.
I'm sorry. Yo, I'm doing the show. What's up? Hey, man, get in there, get in there. Are you doing? You want to jump on the show? Go ahead, go ahead. Here, come on. Now the dog's ready. I have a dog. You all right over there? Okay, you got some. Got a in studio guest, a neighbor of mine. Tito just stopped by. Purple Heart vet, one of the most amazing dudes I've ever met. You got it. All right. Anyway, sorry about the delay there. All right, go ahead and you were saying before. What were we talking about? We
Well,
were we went
I was
we
talking
talked
about
about
the book.
the book, right?
We
Right.
were talking about the book, and then we were just, we were talking about reading and strategies to, for people to read and stuff like that because people want to read more. And reading is important, and what I was going to say before we got on the Federal Reserve or the election was that education. There's a book I read called "Teaching as a Subversive Activity," right?
Dang.
And when I read this book called "Teaching as a Subversive Activity," man, let me tell you, I didn't really understand how you could use education and turn it into really indoctrination. And so people would be under this perception that, the better of this education they got, the better off they would be. When in actuality, it was almost like they'd be putting their foot that much deeper into the trap, right? And education really works that way. It's an indoctrination, and it's really sad that our school system is based on this sort of indoctrination system. You know what I mean?
Mm. Well, I mean, you hear a lot about from quote unquote right wing people about the dangers of that, of the government being able to have wield that type of control over young minds, for instance,
Right.
and being able to shape how society is thinking in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's but and then that goes to, for example, talking about banking. How many people do you think you could walk up to and you could ask, "Hey, can you give me kind of a historical from the beginning of banking to today? Kind of tell me the history of banking." And I'm talking to people that got 10, 20, 30, maybe more money in the bank. They got a lot, they have a lot in the bank right now, right? And you could ask these people like, what is the genesis, or what's the cornerstone of banking? What's the foundational stone of banking? What was its intent? And you'll hear me say that a lot, right? What's the foundational stone and what was its intent when applied
The
on a
intent,
population of people
the intent of the institution of
of
banking,
banking? Exactly.
of
Right. And
holding, like
so,
basically holding money and lending money.
right.
Is
Well,
that what, like,
and
what do
so
you
the
explain
story
what
is
you mean
like this right
by
here
banking?
is you have goldsmiths who fashioned the gold when we agreed on a gold standard, right? And so, kind of early on, people acquired so much gold that they didn't really just want to keep this gold at their house, or where were they going to keep this stuff at? And so the goldsmiths would create the gold, fashion the gold, and then kind of just store the gold for their customers. Until at which point, the goldsmith figured, man, I might as well go and make me a little side hustle and just start loaning currency against the gold that's in the bank, right? Nobody would be the wiser. People would pay back what they owe. These folks aren't going to come and surely ask for all their gold. Where else are they going to take it, right? And so eventually, some of these guys got a little wiser to what the goldsmith was doing. They called in their loans, so to speak, and he wasn't able to pay up. But the funny part is that they didn't tell on him. They didn't expose him. They just said, cut us in on the deal. And there is your modern banking begins, right? And so banking now, we talk about the Federal Reserve requirements. We're talking about obviously the 10% real reserve that has to remain in the bank account if you have,
Okay, I
put
see
a
what you mean.
deposit in the bank. The bank has to keep so much of your money, but a small percentage, about a 10,
Yeah, only
and
10%.
right, and they keep that in the bank, and then the other 90% they can loan out, which is essentially how banks make their money. Right? There's a lot of other ways and fees and things they'll hit you with in different programs and departments and
Or they're
lending
investing
and
your money.
all this pretty trimming, wealth asset management. A lot of those different branches of banking don't even make money. They just make a bank look good.
Mm.
Most of the money that they're making off the money you put in the bank. I mean, it's like a bookie. It's like a guy who's betting. They're hedging their bets. Sometimes they're going to win. Sometimes they're going to lose. And if you really look at the stock statistics, more often than not, they're going to lose. Probably
Mm.
70 to 30 on the
The banks
losing
gonna
side.
lose?
being 70 is generous. It's really probably more like 80-20. So your chances of success are really less than 20, you know? And so, but it's just this crazy thing where we kind of purport it to be, something that it's not. Um, but you know, um, when we talk about the real reserve requirements and we talk about people's ignorance of the actual requirement itself, here's a bank and how they're making all their money. We walk up to these banks and I mean, there's some nice ones. They've all got a Keurig now. In there, you can get your nice little cup of coffee and the marble floors are immaculate. Like these safes are made out of titanium. I mean, they are just state of the art. And it's your money that's building these banks that we look at as being these imposing centers of finance, when really it's just a whole bunch of regular people's money being held hostage and then just being pimped out to the nearest bidder at some crazy interest rate, because we say, well, you don't have good credit, so we're going to charge you more, right? And so it's essentially this scam.
But wouldn't they charge more? Like, wouldn't they say that they charge more interest if you have bad credit because you're more
Right.
risky? Isn't that what
Because
they normally say?
you're a risky bet. But the thing is this is that where does the money go and where does the money come from? For example, all right, when the government says we want, the president gets on the phone, Trump says, man, we want to put 10 billion in the economy. I want 10 billion. So we make a call to the treasurer, they have their little meeting, do their little approvals and budgets and finance, and boom, here's 10 billion, right? We got it approved. But first, we make up some little funny ass little treasury notes and we send them over. They send up some even nicer, little prettier bills with blue lines down the middle, and they send them back to us, right? But it's not legal tender yet until they actually put it in the treasury, and then that's when it becomes legal tender. But at that moment that it starts to go into these more corporate banks entities is when the real reserve begins to kick in, because Chase Manhattan Bank starts to put all these funds in the bank, and then now they can take these massive amounts of infusion of capital into their banks and they start loaning this money out. And we're in debt to some money that wasn't, where'd it come from?
Hmm.
And so it's a debt creation system, not a wealth creation system. We didn't make anybody wealthy off of this money that just came in the door, because 90% of it is being used for what? To be loaned out, which means 90% of the people who touch this money are going immediately into debt. The other 10% in our safe, and you can't have it unless you declare an emergency. So it's debt for everybody. Party up, you see? But if people don't understand economics, they look at this and they're like, ooh, new fresh money. It's not. It's like you should throw up when you see more money being printed, because it means the last money that you had ain't worth shit. That's what that means. They stop printing money, that's when you can start ironing your little $1 bills in the closet. And you know what I mean? You can start really stacking up. Your money's about to be worth something when they stop making it. You feel me? And so at the end of the day, these bankers and the government now is talking about trying to reduce the real reserves. So that's going to give them even more wiggle room of money to be able to manipulate and to be able to, grow more debt for us and more wealth for them, which is scary.
Man, I thought the 10% was already too little.
Right.
I mean, that's especially with what we saw happen with, there's supposed to be a Chinese wall, what they call it, Chinese wall,
Right.
the Great Wall of China, right? Wall between the banking operations and investment operations. And I mean, I don't know, honestly, I don't know what the current regulations are like, but if they're doing stuff like creating financial instruments that could default or that could basically lose the money that they have deposited. Um, that's basically what caused the recession that we had, what, a decade ago, or
Right.
over a decade ago. I mean, something similar. It's similar. I mean, I can't remember exactly how much the actual banks got into. I mean, I know as far as through their banking operations, I know through their financial operations, which I guess they like to speak about it separately. even though they're intertwined. But like in the industry, they always like to talk about finance and banking as if they're two separate things. But the fact that they sort of commingle puts your deposits at risk. And I mean, I think one of the bigger problems we got now is the fact that people don't even have money in savings across the United States. We have some folks that are doing well, but you have a growing population.
Let me give you my wealth breakdown.
Money actually in the bank.
All right. The wealth breakdown statistics. Are you ready for this?
Hit it.
Now, we have about 115, 16 trillion dollars of wealth in America, right? And $100 trillion of that wealth belongs to people who classify themselves on the census as being white, non-Hispanic. And those who qualify themselves as being black or African American have $3 trillion of this 115, 116 trillion dollars of wealth, right? Which kind of roughly breaks down to about 93% and a little bit less than 3%. So black folks have about 3% of America's wealth, and quote unquote white folks, non-Hispanic, have about 92% of America's wealth. And so there's this vast wealth gap. Now, income gap is a different thing. I do a little bit of research about the income gap, but one thing I've learned is that when you're talking about income, more comes in sometimes than others. So the numbers are really, really skewed. They're hard to really keep up with sometimes. So I like to use wealth statistics. And so the thing about the wealth statistics is just you can see, like, even when we talk about, like, a lot of these presidential candidates are running and they're talking about specific policies to attack student loans and poor people. You've heard these programs, right?
Right. Sorry,
and so what they're saying is essentially, I've heard Kamala Harris say it, Bernie Sanders, and one other candidate. I can't think of the name right offhand. But when asked, kind of what they were going to do in the face of, kind of this wealth gap that existed for Black Americans, and after the 2007 housing crisis, that a lot of people don't know, African Americans lost about 1/3 of the total wealth that was in Black America. Obviously, because real estate is such a prized asset when it comes to what a person's net worth is. And so by losing as many homes as were lost during that, rightfully or wrongfully, but that was a great amount of wealth that was lost for one group of people to kind of have to bounce back from. And so now when you look at the current wealth statistics, the gap is just so wide that it's insane. When you really look at the numbers, if you've ever looked online or researched it, it's the craziest thing.
Well, what do you? I have. Well, okay, so my neighbor Tito brought up a point saying, what did you say? That the people were upside down in their homes?
People that lost their homes were upside down in their homes. They were upside down in their homes. They didn't have no equity. So when they lost their homes, they didn't lose any wealth. They didn't have anything.
Right. Well, I mean, the
But
practice was this.
Now, so
The banks made money off of selling the homes.
All their equity.
Okay. And so the thing is that this was kind of the issue that preceded the Barack Obama election. And it was the bank bailouts. And so we bailed out the banks. Well, why did the banks need to be bailed out? Because the banks had engaged in this practice where they knew that these people didn't qualify. And it's almost to say, well, shame on these people for trying to get lending for houses that they couldn't afford.
For chasing the American dream.
At some point in time, banks have to take a responsibility of the people. Like, if you're going to put people in debt, you at the very least have to be a little bit more crafty at it than to actually go bankrupt putting people in debt. Because at the end of the day, what is the expertise of the bank if it's not to be able to put its money down on a good lender, right? I mean, what else is a bank designed to do, especially in this sort of a capitalist society where everything is about private property? And because everything is about private property, and we live in sort of this capitalistic society that we live in, banks become ultimately important when it comes to home ownership. And when we're talking about home ownership, we're talking about something that historically There's a great book on this by a gentleman by the name of Richard Rothstein. He wrote a book called The Color of Law. And The Color of Law really breaks down why America's neighborhoods and our cities are built exactly on the same model in almost every city in America. Baltimore is just like Los Angeles, is just like Seattle, is just like Portland, is just like Houston, is just like Jackson, Mississippi, is just like Memphis, is just like all of these cities have the exact same blueprint, right? And so economically, when it comes to housing, this has always been kind of a sticking point with the banks and with black folks. So yeah, sure, he's definitely right that folks didn't have equity in those homes, but it's a lot of times it's really, to me, very important that we paint the picture and we point the finger at the banks who just exponentially were getting over on people like many times over, and it's just not a new practice. So although these people need to take some responsibility for, obviously getting behind or not having equity in their homes, the fact that it happened to so many people at the exact same time kind of shows how systemic it was.
Yeah, but I was saying before they didn't lose that much money, but it did break their back because after you lose a house and foreclose, now you got bad credit. You're trying to get an
Right.
apartment, you got to get a credit check. You can't get it.
Right.
You're trying to go ahead and get yourself another vehicle, or you're trying to get a loan to stay afloat. With a foreclosure, you can't get it. So that the banks actually broke their back. You are right on that.
Absolutely. And so,
Right. Yeah.
and the thing is that when we talk about the Obama presidency, whenever I started really getting into economics, I started looking at 2007, 2008, 2009. And if you look at like American wealth statistics and data and stuff like that, like this crazy transition of wealth happened when Obama came into office. And it's the most insane thing. If you ever like just like Google that or just research that, you'll see like all these crazy different pieces that are written about this great wealth transfer. And subsequently, there's another wealth transfer that's about to happen. About $62.2 trillion is about to change hands over the next however many years, as baby boomers they're kind of at that point now where they're starting to reach the age where they're starting to see the deepest decline in the or the deepest increase in deaths, I should say. Trying to find a nice way to talk about death. And so a lot of these folks are starting to pass on and leave their inheritances with their family. And so it's estimated to be about $62.2 trillion is the impact. And I told you how much wealth America has. We're at about $116 trillion. So essentially, about a little bit more than half of America's wealth is about to change hands over the next 10 years.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot going on with that whole mess. The scam that was played on potential homeowners. Uh, that wasn't some of it wasn't even really bank based. You had people like Countrywide, and you had some other. I mean, they're sort of they're lending institutions, but the whole notion that you could package basically what were known as bunk. I mean, they were all those subprime mortgages were like those they were the mortgages that they knew were bad. They knew they would foreclose. They sold these dreams to these people. And what do you say to those people who just want to lay all the blame on the homeowner who chase that American dream of owning their own home, being a real estate owner,
Because
and
those are
were
people
sold
who
this
generally
dream
come from wealth. The people who come from, and that's the thing, is that in America, people are really good at lying about what they got, right? And we can live on the same street, kind of the same house, drive around about the same kind of car, and live about the same kind of life, but we could be living in two different Americas. I could be paying rent on my house. I could be paying or financing my car at some ridiculous rates. I could have to go to work every day, work overtime, and not really get a chance to spend time with my family. Maybe I don't get a chance to go on vacation, etc. But we live on the same street, living about the same kind of house, drive about the same kind of car, wear about the same kind of clothes, and we could be living in two different Americas. Some of us are renting, and some of us are owning. And a lot of those people who are owning are part of that club of people I'm talking about that have transitioned wealth, much like the 62.2 trillion that was estimated, I believe, by Forbes magazine, to be in the midst of being transferred. And so
Mm.
it, almost everything in this country is about to change hands. And so the person who's got it in their hand didn't necessarily have to earn it. And this ain't the first time that's happened. And so that builds a little bit of antipathy towards people who don't succeed.
That well, why wouldn't it be more obvious to them if they were given through a transfer of wealth, this wealth? Why? I mean, isn't that a stark contrast from those who are trying and failing? I mean, I see where you're coming from, but why isn't the glaring
There's the golden
why isn't
veil.
that
In America,
glaring
we have the golden
difference
veil.
available to them? You know,
We have the golden veil. What did they sell this place as when people were coming to America? They came here for the American dream. Streets
right?
paved the gold, right?
But the folks that paved the street were getting paid minimum wage too.
Well, or nothing, or nothing.
That's Boots Riley.
And so,
That's,
but the thing is this is that America is built on the foundation of it's all smoke and mirrors,
mm.
you know. And
Well, right. At the
until
end of the
we
day,
have a population of people who even know some semblance of the truth. See, the only reason racism still exists is because in the heart of hearts of the everyday non-black person in America, there's just still this antipathy towards dark people that won't allow a person to just take the color completely out of the equation, you know, and let's just look at these as being people. But see, that in itself is the most difficult task to ask of people is to humanize a group of people that our society conditions and indoctrinates people to not humanize.
mm,
Right? We call these people slaves, but if you go back and you look at the late 1800s, early 1900s, nobody else was inventing shit. Why? Because have you ever had your air conditioner break and been like, "Oh man, this is what it was like back in the 1800s,"
mm,
right? So the height of luxury was to be able to not have to sweat your ass off and take 5 showers in a day. If that was a thing, you know, because
mm-hmm.
water wasn't like what it is now. So like staying cool and clean was like, man, that was akin to a weekend at the Hilton. I was saying something, and I didn't sweat hardly any all day.
Mm,
Really? Wow. Great. Love it. So there weren't a lot of skilled laborers and craftsmen who were not African people or natives. You
mm,
know, there's a lot to be said, because a lot of people get it twisted, and we've been sold this narrative. When we're talking about native people and we're talking about African people, we're talking about the same people. Whether we're talking about the fact that African people had came here recently, or the fact that the people who are here that are indigenous or are native are people who originate from Africa anyway,
mm,
right? No matter where you go from it, the people originate from there. Like even if you look in South America, I know I'm getting off on a tangent a little bit, but if you look in South America, or excuse me, in Mexico, the second and third largest pyramid in the world by volume are in Mexico. But
mm,
there's not the evolution or development of pyramids that you see if you go back to Egypt, which was about 3,000 to 2,000 years before these pyramids in North America. And so it kind of just shows you the fact that, like, if you go to Egypt, you could see the pyramid of, like, for example, Snaferu, and it's a developmental pyramid. It's what they call the Bent pyramid. It was imperfect, and they kept the pharaohs kept trying, and they kept making new pyramids to try to perfect the science. And then when they did, the Great Pyramid of Giza is the one that we celebrate and we venerate because that's when they got it right. It was perfect,
mm,
right? And so you don't see that same development and evolution of architecture and science here in North America, which leads many common sense scholars to believe that the technology obviously originated in a place that we can prove the development actually occurred, which would then tie and link both of these civilizations together. But we live in a world where European scientists are the ones who write the works that are most readily accepted, and they have a theory called isolationism. And so through isolationism, they refuse to believe that there is any cross-cultural mix between, Africans from Africa and anything else that's happened in the world.
Hmm. Like as if Africa was completely isolated. Yeah, like what was the barrier? I mean,
It was
obviously it's
Asia. It was
connected to.
actually Asia. It wasn't Africa. That's what the European called it when he came in,
Mm,
right? So I oftentimes I get into it with a lot of my brothers who, we're like black power, African people, and they get so caught up in, they're like, oh no, you shouldn't say black because black doesn't have a country. I agree. You're right. You're sure right. You're right. Hey, I'm with you, right? Or they say you're not African American. I'm like, hey, I'm with you, but I'm not. I've gotten past the point of, you know, trying to describe myself to the world. Like I know who I am. It doesn't matter black, African American. And so sometimes we can get caught in the semantics as an oppressed people
mm,
where we are clawing and fighting for every piece of identity. And oftentimes you first have to just get your damn mind back together. And that's what a lot of times I stress to a lot of black people, African people, when they get a little too crazy when it's like, come on, even African itself doesn't belong to our ancestors. Right. And so you have to sometimes temper things with a little grain of salt and, like Ice Cube said, check yourself before you wreck yourself.
right. Well, I mean, so on one hand, if if we're all human, one race of humans, we all, I would say, originated from Africa. It seems that
Right.
science and history and a lot of things point that direction, and
Right.
DNA,
Absolutely.
stuff
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that.
I agree with you 100%. I just love to qualify it and open up the doors of people's consciousness and remind them that this also was called Asia then.
Oh, sure, sure. But I mean, so how how important and why? I mean, I have my notions, but I want to hear it from you. I want to hear your opinion. How important and why how important is it for Black people to, and that's the other thing, to talk about Black people, that's sort of looking at it at a whole group of folks very monolithically, as we know the grand diversity of Africa.
Right.
And there's a lot of Black people throughout the whole continent.
Right.
Black people in the Caribbean, Black people in South America.
Right.
And so when we talk about Black people, even in the United States, we have the African descendants of slaves, and we
Right.
have the other, all the whole family of Black people.
Right.
When How important is it to sort of to note that, and how important is it to not? Because I could see both being important and powerful,
To know their history.
right? Individually,
Right.
as opposed to monolithically as Black people,
Okay.
but
Well,
at the same time knowing that Black people have, as a monolith, been treated as a monolith,
right.
right?
Surely.
So there's social ramifications therein.
Well, there's
Like,
two kinds of black people, I like to say.
oh,
There are, and what I mean by that is not what initially probably sounds like. But there's two kind of black people. There are black people of ancient Kemet or Nubia or that era and time
hmm,
in which they venerated the sun, and their proximity to the sun created such a blackness of people that all other civilizations of people, when they came in contact with these people, whatever word or phrase in their language that meant black or darkest was obviously employed upon these people, as their color was so much different than everyone else, almost to the fact that they could not help this. But it was not like the other class of black people who are the more modern group of black people who exist in America. And that is a class of black people who this word black has been written into the legal system, and black has counted as a negative against you, literally. And that's a direct contrast to in ancient times, this actually was a result of one being close to that which we venerated, which was the sun, which was the source of all energy. And we can get into that spiritual conversation some other time. But there was actually some realness about the 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 blackness that these people experienced. Them being called black was, yes, we are black because we're close to the sun, right? As opposed to being black, and blackness makes you closest to oppression.
Well, I mean, the notion of blackness being closest to oppression would only be, I would imagine, only be due to a history of oppression.
Right.
Otherwise, blackness wouldn't be associated with said
And
oppression.
that's why two different types of black people. And so the black people that we're talking about modern times, let me blow my nose right quick. In modern times are the people who are associated with the oppression, not the people who are associated with that, with the sun and with that deity.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right.
All right. So Chris says, yes, we're all the same people. Thank you for bringing up that point. It always starts with self, and very good points. So nodding along with you.
Right.
What what do you think about, we never got to get sort of like a notion of who you are. Do you want to give people a rundown real quick? Because I'm interested, because I'm
Yeah,
not really
yeah.
sure. I didn't really stalk you too much before having you on the show, to be honest, because I figured we'd figure it out here, and then maybe that'll also help bring some context to where you're coming from with your point of view.
Right. For sure. Well, for me, son of two black folks, one whose family was from the East Coast. My grandmother was from actually Nova Scotia, Halifax. She moved to Boston, married my grandfather, who was from Rhode Island. Um, and my other grandparents, one was a half Cherokee, half black woman from Georgia. My grandfather was a really, really, really dark brother from Mississippi. And so he was a command sergeant major in the military, and that's kind of was the patriarch of my family. My mother's, well, my dad, my father's father also was in the military as well, the one that was from Rhode Island. So I was raised in a, really military family where, obviously there was a lot of discipline, a lot of expectations. And so I saw the good side of life. But I grew up I'm 43. I was born in 76. And so I literally lived right through the crack era, gang, the whole, every sort of piece of genocide that a young black male could touch, I lived through it. And so essentially, it really kind of shaped my life because there's a thing called peer groups, right? And when you realize, and what I've come to realize is that, when you come from a peer group of people who we don't affirm people's intellect, So for me, being a military kid from a military family, both sides of my family, my grandfather being a command sergeant major, like we spoke proper English. Like we didn't, we weren't overly like just a bunch of little Carltons, but we spoke good English. And oftentimes when talking to other black folks, they would be like, "Oh man, you trying to act white, talking white." And so when the consciousness psychologically of your peer group is to associate acting white with being smart, well then acting black must equal being right. And so it's the damnedest thing that as a grown man now, and I've studied psychology, clinical psychology, I've studied history, obviously, and I've studied science and so many different things that when I started to put all the education that I gave myself together, because as I'll tell you, I ended up, getting involved in the streets and gangs and selling drugs, and it was a wild ride, and make a great movie or a book one day. And I ended up being sentenced to 75 years in prison when I was 20 years old. And you know, I was lucky to get that because the people wanted to give me like these crazy life sentences. I was young, I was smart, and I was running a criminal enterprise. And there was a bunch of old grown ass people that kept talking about this kid. Like, so who's the guy? Who's the boss man? Like, yeah, that kid over there. They'd be like, man, stop lying to us. I've literally watched the surveillance tape where these guys were snitching on me, and the police didn't even listen to them at first.
Wow.
They were like, man, get out of here, man. The kid out there playing basketball, the skinny guy playing basketball. Come on, man. No way, not this guy. And so they were used to seeing a different type of gangster, so to speak. They were used to seeing some guy that had to be rah-rah mean up in your face. And then, I wasn't trying to be Al Capone or nobody, but I understood that there had to be a certain amount of, ass whooping that had to get done. And we did just enough ass whooping that nobody wanted to, question that aspect of the game. But the point is that, I feel myself, running this organization that, got me a lot of time in prison. You know what I mean? And so I learned a lot about loyalty.
So wait, you got time in prison for running an organization?
Yeah, for being involved in crime, essentially. I ended up escaping the RICO charges and all that type of stuff. That was kind of new when I went to prison. This was in '96 when I called my case. The RICO Act was really new. I think it was like '94 they came out with it. They weren't really using it back then like that. And so, and again, that's one of the great fortunes of my timing of what happened to me. Like, Joe Biden signs the crime bill in 1994. I'm in prison in 1997. So I literally watched the private prisons be built. I was one of the first inmates at a private prison system that was being built where I was at. I was number 1,834. I'll never forget. That was my chit number. My laundry number was 1834. Everything I did was 1834. And they gave us those numbers as we lined up and got off those buses at this institution with brand new paint. Wow. I'll never forget that. And so, I was 21 years old. I was a blood. I was a gang member, and I was a, mastermind criminal. At least I thought I was, and they did too with the sentence they gave me. And that was my life at 21 years old. And so I had to make a lot of decisions, from that point on.
At least you're a proven entrepreneur.
Right. Yeah. I mean, definitely with the street game. That's any type of legal stuff.
In that much trouble, then you must be running something successful.
I'm definitely working on it. I've got a few things going, and for me, I've had to make a transition from really being one of those people out there trying to be in the matrix, so to speak. Get a job, work a job, be a robot, 10 o'clock to the check.
Yeah.
Again. And so one thing I learned is that, I read this book called The 48 Laws of Power. I'm sure you heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first law of the book. You remember the very first law of 48 Laws of Power?
Is it don't like overshadow the master or something like that?
Ding ding, sir. Never outshine the master.
Oh yeah, that's right. Outshine, not outshadow. You want to outshadow.
You gave it up. You gave a good answer. And so, right. And that's something that I'm not really good at because if it was like survival on the line and we was getting kidnapped and the Nazis was here, well, sure, yeah, we're not going to overshadow you, Mr. Hitler. Do your thing, buddy. Love the mustache. You know what I mean? But yeah, not really been my thing. And so I'm not disrespectful, but I'm definitely one of those people that if I sit back and two people are trying to figure out how to screw in a light bulb and I know how to do it, I'm just going to be like, fellas, just, twist it to the left. This is one of those Canadian bulbs. I don't know, but when you're working for people, you have to be very sensitive to people's egos because people have titles and I've been here 29 years and they've got tenure. They have all these other things that they have all this emotional attachment
there's a
to with their
hierarchy.
jobs that cause them to
yeah.
act like what I call workplace psychopaths.
Well, there's a power imbalance, and they're taking advantage of it to their own means. Have you ever watched the documentary "I Am Fishhead"?
No,
Dude, check that out. Uh-oh, I think we had a little hiccup in the internet connection. I Am Fishhead. It's you can see it for free on Top Documentary Films either .com or .org. I don't remember. Top Documentary Films. Anyway, the reason it's called "I Am Fishhead" is because the saying goes, "The fish always rots from the head," and it's real. The main premise is the prevalence of psychopaths, or at least people on the psychopathic spectrum, deep on the psychopathic spectrum, seeking power in corporate society. And the prevalence of not only of their seeking that power, but also holding and wielding that power. And it also goes. They talk a little bit about it happening in government as well.
Well, you almost have to look at that's a good point. That's a very good point, right? And so people talk about a democracy, right? If people really understood what the etymology of the word democracy is, you know what the etymology of that word is? It's demonic. It's
No.
demonic.
Really?
It's demonic. It's Greek, right? And so when you look at the essence of what politics are, it's so odd that we have this narrative where we talk about, they had this Pizzagate, children. Look at your boy Joe Biden, can't keep his hands off of anybody. And the Bohemian Club. I mean, there's just so many different little, little conspiracies, as we'll call them, that it kind of just begs the question of like, where there's smoke, there's fire. Surely the police would not sit here and be like, "There's 12 crackheads I just saw leaving that house," but that's a church. That's not a crack house. At some point in time, you're gonna go down there and see if the pastor's preaching sermons or he's selling crack.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I don't see why we don't employ that same logic to stuff like this, because all you have to do is look at it and see that that's what politics are about. Politics is this game where people who have these psychopathic ambitions want to wield and institute control over large groups of people. The average person has no interest in politics. So for somebody to make it their entire lives and family business and the ultimate, thing, this is what they're most passionate about. And these are wealthy people. Wealthy people should never be freaking passionate about politics unless it's kind of trying to hold on to the wealth they got. Because when you're spending all that money and when you have money in the capitalist society, you really don't have any worries or concerns at all, really. Except your health, you just better be able to live the next day. As long as you can live the next day, you're good, right? And so, because rich people have this penchant for politics, not poor people. See, poor people by design are the people who should dream of being politicians, not a point guard for the Chicago Bulls, right? Poor people should be dreaming of having the opportunity to have power. But the one thing about capitalism is we don't teach young people what power really is. We can't. Young people, for the life of them, can't quantify for me what power is. And when I tell them power is just me being able to do what I want to do without you being able to stop me, that's power, right? And so when people look at that, they're like, "Oh, okay, that's power, right? That makes sense." People have all. I mean, I've asked people this question. They give me all these beautiful soliloquies and this and the institution of the facility, the facilitation of and the implementation. I'm like, yeah, okay. Hold your finger out. How many? Just hold one finger out. Okay, they hold one finger out. And I'm gonna take my fist and I punch it down on a one finger and it goes where I want it to go. Now that's power. That's power. And so until people fundamentally look at politics in a different light, it will always be something that the rich and the wealthy can obsess over, and they're going to be psychopathic about it, because the average poor person doesn't we spend too much time worried about. You see how many people be at these football games, and I love football. 90,000 people be at a football game. You know,
Yeah,
come
that's
on,
like what other mass gathering do you see happen like that?
100,000 people out here for at the end of the day a mother freaking game,
Right.
and we got lives on the line every day in this world. We got people who really is not. You know what I mean? They're not good. And when you look at how money is generated in these stadiums, now mind you, here's where I gotta take it to this, is that these stadiums, man, if you ever research where these stadiums are built at, pick a random stadium, football, basketball, hockey sometimes too. Pick a random stadium, pick a team like Detroit Red Wings and Philadelphia Flyers, and go into these communities and actually see where these stadiums are built. And I guarantee you, almost every time, if not 10 out of 10 times, where those stadiums are built, it'll be the old black neighborhood where there was black businesses, black people owned their own homes, had property. It was run down, probably trashed out, you know,
Hmm.
swish and sweep wrappers on the ground and 40-ounce bottles of Newport packages, but it was theirs.
Hmm.
But as soon as it's time to build a stadium, where are we going to build it at? We're not going to build it in the suburbs. We don't need all that traffic. We don't need all of that bad uh, stuff. We don't want that.
Right.
So,
So how what methods do they use to take the land?
oh man, all sorts of little sneaky acquisition tactics. One that always works good with black people is all you gotta do is find one of us who ain't shit. That's about it. You just find one of us who ain't crap. Go down to the NAACP, you'll find a whole bunch of them working directly for the interests against black people. It's not hard to find black people who will work against the interests of black people.
Well,
It's not hard at all to
because
find.
it works for their interest.
Huh?
Because it undoubtedly works for their interest, I would imagine.
Well, we call it a sellout, right? And
Sure.
people really don't understand the origin of that word sellout. And the origin of it is in 1710 in South Carolina and later in Virginia, they instituted this law called meritorious manumission. And essentially what meritorious manumission laws were those laws that whites instituted that gave freedom to slaves. Meritorious meaning to earn, manumission meaning release or freedom. And so, how these slaves would earn their freedom is essentially by being a spy for the master. You remember the movie Life and the dude that tell him about the gun line, boss.
Mm.
That, ironically, is a caricature that directly mirrors sort of a psychology that's created when you create laws like that. Imagine being a slave on a plantation and you saw some black person walking free. Who is that walking free? What? Free? We can be free. Yeah, they passed the law, Jasper. You can't read, so I'm gonna read it to you. All you gotta do is ABC. Well, I'm gonna do that. I want to be free. Shoot. And when you apply enough pressure,
Like
pressure multiplies.
what would you have to do? Like snitch on somebody trying to break out or something like that?
Absolutely. That was the ultimate prize was to tell on any slave rebellion. And that's why there were really so few reported slave rebellions because they had and when you look at it, it mirrors the snitch system they have in these ghettos right now. Like these two brothers be on the corner, hungry, starving, go rob a store together. These folks haven't cared about you, the government, the city, these random citizens ain't gave two craps about little Willie and little Eddie when they was nice little boys. And look how cute they are. And they were starving and going hungry most nights then, right? And so when they finally had enough of it, and then poverty criminalizes people. And once that poverty criminalizes you, and then those same police would show up, and then now you the criminal, you're the bad guy, right? And so at the end of the day, it's kind of this thing that just gets lost on people how poverty affects and impacts these sorts of things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many layers to not only to what we're talking about. You could look at poverty in of itself not having, I troll a bunch of libertarian sites and like stuff like the Ayn Rand websites and stuff like that, and they always talk all this crap about socialism, or they'll talk, or they'll do stuff like just peddle some propaganda about capitalism. And so I go on there and I troll their Facebook page,
Right.
and it's just something that a lot of those folks never seem to consider is the effects of the long-term effects of on the material reality that poverty can have to access to.
Well, I think they do understand, but I also think that this is that, the mentality that is white supremacy, that is racism, it's a really deep seated psychological and biological disorder, right? And it's almost, we've really, as a society, we have done a disservice to people who are black folks, American descendants of slaves, or black people, or whatever. But people who come from that.
Okay, I don't know what just happened. I think if you can still hear me, I think my computer just ran out of memory and I lost my Skype connection. Can you guys hear? My camera stopped working a while back, and I keep trying to unplug it and plug it back in. And oh man, that's what happens when you use old and dying equipment. I think, yeah, so Skype died. King's sick. Sorry I didn't get to at least give him an outro of some sort. So folks that are still there, I'm still trying to get the camera to work. I can't even get, that looks like everything's just frozen at this point. So I guess I'll just put a little bit of Seprock beats back on, and we'll probably call it a day. We'll have King Sick back on, and hopefully, guys out there in the world, if you have a old computer, laptop, or something that's better than this corporate refurbished computer I got back and you want to donate it to the Boyd, I can't say that it's qualified for tax write-off, qualified charity. But if you do appreciate the Boyd and you happen to have some equipment, let me know. I'm down to use it, because I think this computer's going to die at some point mid-episode. So let's see here. So if you're still watching, looks like we got 4 on YouTube, unless that's just frozen too. And I don't even know. Looks like my system does not have the resources. Oh, getting echo. I don't know what that's all about. All right. Well, thank you for joining for another episode of the Boyd. Special guest King Sick. We'll have King Sick back on in the future for sure. All right. Check. Check. Thank you all again for joining, and I bid you all farewell. Don't forget Seprock Beats, link in the description. And this is another episode of Void. Like, subscribe, tell your friends. Let's build this audience so we can have a really good conversation. Lots of participants. Thank you, Superfan Chris, for all the good points. Thank you, Jay, for jumping in, and thank you, Team 6. Sorry, we got this.